It is August 23, 1944. Deep inside his heavily fortified headquarters at the Hotel Maurice on the Rue de Rivoli, a German general stands over a map of the most beautiful city in the world. In his hand is a cable from Adolf Hitler himself. The message is 4 words in German: brutal, absolute, irrevocable. Paris must not pass into the enemy's hands except as a field of ruins. The general reads it again. Outside his window, the Eiffel Tower rises into the late summer sky. Notre Dame stands as it has stood for 800 years. The bridges of the Seine catch the morning light. 2,000 years of human civilization spread across a city of 4 million people. Hitler wants all of it reduced to ash and rubble before the Allies arrive. And the man holding this order has a reputation that should make you very afraid for Paris. They call him the wrecker of cities. So why, 2 days later, does Paris still stand? To understand what happened in those 48 hours, you need to understand who Dietrich von Choltitz really was. Born on November 9, 1894, into an aristocratic Prussian family in Silesia, von Choltitz had been a soldier from the moment he was old enough to hold a rifle. He enrolled in the Dresden Cadet School in 1907 at the age of 13. He fought in the First World War as a teenage officer on the Western Front, surviving the Battle of the Marne, the Battle of Ypres, and the Battle of the Somme. He was promoted to lieutenant before the war ended. He spent the next 2 decades rising quietly and methodically through the ranks of the German army. By 1937, he was a major. By 1938, he was a lieutenant colonel. And when World War II began in September 1939, he was already commanding infantry forces in the invasion of Poland. This was not a man who questioned orders. This was not a man who hesitated. This was a professional military officer in the most precise German tradition, a man who had built his entire career on discipline, loyalty, and execution. And when Germany needed cities destroyed, they sent von Choltitz. In May 1940, his regiment fought in the battle for Rotterdam. The Dutch city was bombed so heavily that its medieval city center was almost entirely destroyed. In 1942, he commanded forces during the siege of Sevastopol on the Eastern Front, one of the most brutal campaigns of the entire war, a grinding, merciless assault that reduced that Soviet port city to near total ruin. His men fought street by street, building by building, until there was almost nothing left standing. The nickname followed him everywhere, the wrecker of cities. This was the man Adolf Hitler personally chose to be the last military governor of Paris. On August 7, 1944, von Choltitz was summoned to meet Hitler personally at the Wolf's Lair, the Führer's fortified command headquarters in East Prussia. He arrived expecting to receive a competent military briefing from the supreme commander of the German war machine. What he saw instead shook him to his foundation. Hitler was not the commanding, decisive leader von Choltitz had known from a distance. The man standing in front of him was physically deteriorating. His hands shook uncontrollably. His posture had collapsed. His speech lurched from subject to subject without coherence or logic. He spoke of destroying Paris with a trembling excitement that von Choltitz found not just disturbing, but deeply alarming. He raged about enemies, about traitors, about a war that was, by any objective military assessment, already lost. Von Choltitz later wrote in his memoir that it was during this meeting he concluded with cold clarity that Adolf Hitler had lost his mind. He arrived in Paris on August 9, 1944, to take command of a German garrison of approximately 17,000 soldiers. He had his orders, and he had his reputation. And for the first time in his career, the two were about to come into direct and catastrophic conflict. Here is the detail that makes this story unlike almost any other in the entire war. Von Choltitz did not simply receive one order to destroy Paris, he received them again and again and again. As the Allied forces closed in on the city through August, Hitler's commands became more frequent, more specific, and more unhinged. Destroy the bridges of the Seine, destroy Notre Dame, destroy the Eiffel Tower, destroy every monument, every museum, every building of historic or cultural significance. leave the Allies nothing but rubble and ash. Von Koltitz dutifully followed the first steps of these orders. Engineers under his command placed explosive charges beneath the bridges of the Seine. Charges were laid at monuments and landmarks across the city. Everything was wired and ready. The wrecker of cities was doing what the wrecker of cities did, but he had not yet given the order to detonate. Meanwhile, the streets of Paris were becoming ungovernable. On August 15th, the Paris police went on strike in open defiance of the German occupation. 4 days later, on August 19th, a full general insurrection erupted across the city, led by the French resistance. Barricades appeared overnight on dozens of streets. German vehicles were attacked. Communications were cut. French resistance fighters occupied public buildings across the capital. Von Koltitz had 17,000 men. The city had more than 4 million people. He could not hold it, and he knew it. On August 20th, with the help of Swedish Consul General Raoul Nordling, a ceasefire was brokered between the German garrison and the resistance. Many resistance groups refused to accept it. Skirmishes continued the next day. The truce fractured almost immediately. And then, the Allied armies began to move. On August 22nd, General Eisenhower authorized the advance on Paris. The French 2nd Armored Division, commanded by General Philippe Leclerc, began pushing toward the city from the north. The American 4th Infantry Division advanced from the south. Hitler sent another cable. Paris must not pass into the enemy's hands except as a field of ruins. Von Koltitz read it, set it down on his desk at the Hotel Meurice, and did nothing. On the night of August 24th, as Allied forces reached the outer suburbs of Paris, Raoul Nordling came to von Koltitz for a private meeting that would last most of the night. We do not have a complete record of everything said during those hours. The meeting has been dramatized in films and novels, and historians debate exactly how much of what was said was decisive and how much was mythology built after the fact. What we know is that Nordling was working quietly to prevent bloodshed and that von Koltitz received him, and we know what happened the next morning. August 25th, 1944, dawn. The French 2nd Armored Division crossed the Seine and entered Paris. The explosives beneath the bridges did not detonate. The charges wired to Notre Dame did not detonate. The Eiffel Tower still stood. The Louvre still stood. Every bridge, every monument, every church, every museum that had been wired for destruction remained intact and silent. The city was not burning. In the early afternoon, French troops entered the Hotel Meurice and arrested Dietrich von Koltitz at his headquarters. He was taken under guard to the Gare Montparnasse, where he formally surrendered to General Leclerc and Henri Roll-Tanguy, the commander of the Paris resistance. He signed the document of capitulation. He surrendered his 17,000 men. At some point during those final hours, a telephone call came through to what remained of German headquarters in Paris. Adolf Hitler was on the line. His voice was shaking. He had one question: is Paris burning? It was not. The French 2nd Armored Division and the American 4th Infantry Division had liberated Paris. The following day, August 26th, General Charles de Gaulle led a triumphant liberation march from the Arc de Triomphe down the Champs-Élysées. A city of 2,000 years of history was intact, and the man responsible for keeping it that way was a prisoner. Now, here is where the story becomes genuinely uncomfortable. After the war, von Koltitz was transferred to Trent Park, a British facility north of London, where senior German officers were held in comfortable conditions. What those officers did not know was that British intelligence had installed hidden microphones throughout the building. Every conversation, every private remark, every unguarded moment was recorded. Those recordings, when they were finally analyzed by researchers decades later, revealed something that sits very uneasily alongside the legend of the Savior of Paris. In those secretly recorded conversations, von Koltitz spoke with apparent knowledge of the mass killings of Jewish civilians in territories under German control. Some researchers have argued that the recordings suggest he was more aware of, and possibly more complicit in, Nazi atrocities than his post-war reputation as a heroic dissenter would suggest. He was released from captivity in 1947. He was never charged with any war crimes. He returned to Germany, where he found himself largely shunned by former military colleagues who considered him a traitor to the officers' code. He wrote his memoir in 1951, published in German under the title Brennt Paris, Is Paris Burning?, in which he presented himself as a man of conscience who had defied a madman to protect one of the greatest cities in human history. The book was the primary source for a celebrated 1965 novel by Larry Collins and Dominique Lapierre, which became a bestseller and was turned into a major film the following year. The legend was established. The wrecker of cities had become the savior of Paris. But French historians have never fully accepted this version of events. Some argue that by the time von Choltitz was making his decision, he had neither enough soldiers nor enough logistical support to actually level an entire metropolitan area. Some argue that the French resistance had already made the city ungovernable, and that the destruction Hitler demanded was simply not militarily executable by that point. Some argue that von Choltitz was primarily motivated not by love of Paris or moral courage, but by a cold calculation that the man who saved the city would receive better treatment as a prisoner than the man who burned it. His son Timo, who was born in 1944, the same year his father was standing over those detonators in Paris, later told a British newspaper that his father had no illusions about Hitler's mental state by August 1944. He was no Nazi, Timo said. He hated Hitler. When they met at the Wolf's Lair, he realized the man had gone completely mad. Dietrich von Choltitz died on November 4, 1966, in Baden-Baden, West Germany. He was 71 years old. His funeral was attended by French military officers. The city that he may or may not have consciously chosen to save sent representatives to honor him. Consider what was lost in other cities while Paris survived. London was bombed for 57 consecutive nights during the Blitz. Warsaw was systematically destroyed, building by building, block by block, until barely a wall was left standing. Berlin was reduced to rubble by Allied bombing campaigns. Dresden was incinerated in February 1945 in a firestorm that killed tens of thousands in a single night. And Paris, with its bridges and its cathedrals and its museums and its 8 centuries of architecture, survived the war almost completely untouched. Now, go back to the beginning of this story. A general standing in a hotel room on the Rue de Rivoli, holding a cable from Adolf Hitler, ordering him to reduce the most beautiful city in the world to ash. The question was never simply whether he would obey. The question is what kind of man Dietrich von Choltitz actually was underneath 30 years of absolute military obedience. A hero, a coward, a war criminal who found one moment of moral clarity, a calculating professional who made one pragmatic decision that happened to save 2,000 years of human history. That question does not have a clean answer. Historians are still debating it today, and those British secret recordings from Trent Park, the ones that captured every unguarded conversation of the senior German officers who did not know they were being listened to, have not been fully published. Researchers are still working through them. What else is in those recordings about the man history calls the savior of Paris? We do not yet fully know. If you want to discover the next untold story from the hidden history of World War II, the next video is already waiting for you.